You're sitting there right now in your climate-controlled room, temperature set to exactly 72 degrees, thinking about survival scenarios. You've got your bug-out bag ready, your emergency food stockpiled, maybe even a generator in the garage. But let me ask you something that's going to make you deeply uncomfortable. What happens when the grid goes down in January? Not September, not April. January. When it's 15 degrees outside and dropping. When the wind chill puts the effective temperature at -10. When your breath freezes in the air and exposed skin gets frostbite in under 5 minutes. Here's what I know with absolute certainty. 99% of preppers are planning for a spring apocalypse. They've watched every survival show filmed in temperate weather. They've read every guide written by people who've never spent more than a weekend camping in actual winter conditions. They think they're ready because they have a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees and a propane heater. They're going to freeze to death in week 1. Winter doesn't care about your stockpile. It doesn't care about your tactical knowledge or your weapons cache or your clever hideout location. Winter is physics, and physics always wins. While everyone else is discovering that their preparations were built for a fantasy apocalypse that happens in perfect weather, you're going to understand why cold is the ultimate filter between survivors and casualties. Today I'm going to show you the specific thermodynamic realities that will kill most people in a winter collapse scenario. Not zombies, not raiders, not starvation. Cold. The invisible killer that your body fights every single second when the temperature drops below freezing. The enemy that doesn't take a break, doesn't negotiate, and compounds every other survival challenge by a factor of 10. Forget the day after tomorrow. Forget every Hollywood winter apocalypse scene where people survive in t-shirts because the plot requires it. I'm giving you the physics, the biology, and the tactical mathematics of staying alive when staying warm becomes your full-time job. If you want to be part of the fraction of a percent who actually survive winter without infrastructure, hit subscribe. Drop a comment with your current winter contingency plan. Let's get thermal. Here's the truth they don't tell you in survival guides. Your body is a furnace that requires constant fuel to maintain operating temperature. At 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, you're running a 61-degree temperature differential with 37-degree air. That's not a small gap. That's your body fighting a continuous thermal battle, burning calories just to maintain homeostasis. When ambient temperature drops to freezing, your basal metabolic rate increases by 30 to 40% just to stay alive. You're not doing anything. You're just sitting there shivering, and your body is burning through energy reserves like you're running a marathon. Every hour, every day, until the fuel runs out. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in practice. You're in your shelter 3 days after the collapse. It's 20 degrees outside, maybe 35 inside if you're lucky and your insulation is decent. You're burning 3,000 to 3,500 calories per day just to maintain core temperature. That's roughly double your normal consumption. Your carefully calculated 6-month food supply? You just cut it to 3 months. Maybe less if you're doing any physical work, which you absolutely are, because this is a collapse scenario, and nothing works automatically anymore. But it gets exponentially worse because of what I call the cold cascade. You're cold, so you're burning more calories, so you're eating more, so you're depleting your food faster, so you have to go outside more frequently to forage or scavenge, which exposes you to more cold, which burns more calories, which depletes your food faster. See the loop? Every action you take to solve one problem makes the other problem worse. And here's where most people's plans completely fall apart. Water. You need hydration. Your body needs roughly half a gallon per day minimum, more if you're working hard. But every water source is frozen solid. That snow you're thinking about melting? You need 10 to 12 pounds of snow to produce 1 gallon of water. And melting snow requires heat, which requires fuel, which you're already burning to stay warm and cook food. Run the math with me. Half a gallon of water per day from snow. 12 pounds of snow. You have to collect it, transport it, store it, then melt it using precious fuel resources. That's not a 5-minute task. That's potentially hours of work in sub-freezing conditions every single day. Hours where you're exposed, burning calories, losing heat, and becoming a visible target if anyone's watching. But let's talk about the thing that's going to kill more people than anything else. Shelter insulation and heat retention. Here's what I mean. Your average house is built to retain heat when there's a functioning heating system pumping warm air 24/7. Turn that system off, and the thermal mass of the structure doesn't matter nearly as much as you think. Within 12 to 24 hours, interior temperature equalizes to within 10 or 15 degrees of exterior temperature. Maybe less if you have broken windows or poor door seals. Your suburban house becomes a 40-degree box in a 30-degree world. That's not survival temperature. That's slow hypothermia. That's chilblains and trench foot and respiratory infections and reduced immune function and every cold-related injury that used to be preventable with modern medicine, which you no longer have access to. So what's the actual solution? Here's what works. You need to create a thermal envelope within your existing structure. Forget heating the whole house. You're creating a room within a room, insulated with every material you can scavenge. Sleeping bags, blankets, cardboard, newspaper, clothing, foam, bubble wrap. Layer it on the walls, the ceiling, the floor. You're building a cocoon where your body heat and minimal supplemental heat can actually make a difference. The physics here is simple. Smaller volume equals less heat loss. A 10 by 10 room requires 1/10 the energy to heat as a 100 square foot space. You're not living large. You're living small, contained, and thermally efficient. This is survival, not comfort. Now let's talk about supplemental heat, because you cannot survive on body heat alone below certain temperatures. The human body generates roughly 100 watts of heat at rest. That's like a single incandescent light bulb. In a small, well-insulated space, that's enough to raise temperature maybe 5 to 10 degrees above ambient if you're lucky. It's something, but it's not enough. You need fire, not want, need. And here's where conventional survival wisdom gets people killed. You cannot rely on a single heat source. Your primary system will fail. Your fuel will run out. Your ventilation will get blocked. You need redundancy across multiple fuel types and multiple heat generation methods. Wood is the obvious choice, but only if you understand the mathematics. 1 cord of seasoned hardwood produces roughly 20 million BTUs of heat. Sounds like a lot, right? Except you need approximately 5,000 BTUs per hour to heat a small, insulated 10 by 10 space to survivable temperature in freezing conditions. That's 120,000 BTUs per day. 1 cord lasts you maybe 160 days if you're efficient and only heating during waking hours. And that assumes you have a proper wood stove with good combustion efficiency. An open fireplace? You just cut that efficiency by 70% because most of the heat goes straight up the chimney. You need a stove, not a fireplace. A stove with proper ventilation, proper clearances, and proper draft. This is non-negotiable for long-term winter survival. But here's the kicker that most people never consider. Carbon monoxide. When you're burning anything in an enclosed space, you're producing CO. It's colorless, odorless, and it will kill you in your sleep without warning. You need ventilation even though ventilation means heat loss. You need a functioning CO detector even though batteries die and detectors fail. You need to understand proper combustion and draft management, or you're trading freezing for poisoning. The alternative heat sources matter too. Propane heaters are convenient, but deadly in enclosed spaces without ventilation. Kerosene heaters produce CO and require fresh air exchange. Alcohol burners are cleaner but less efficient. Candles produce minimal heat but are better than nothing. Every system has trade-offs. Every trade-off matters when the margin for error is measured in degrees. Let me teach you something they don't cover in survival courses. Clothing is your primary insulation system, not your shelter. Your shelter keeps the wind off. Your clothing keeps the heat in. And most people's clothing strategy will get them killed because they fundamentally misunderstand how insulation works. Here's how this works for you. Insulation is trapped air. That's it. Whether it's goose down, synthetic fill, wool, or bubble wrap, you're creating dead airspace that prevents convective heat transfer. The more layers, the more trapped air, the better the insulation. But, and this is critical, layers only work if they're dry. Water conducts heat 25 times faster than air. Sweat-soaked clothing is worse than no clothing because it's actively pulling heat away from your body through evaporative cooling. This is why people die wearing heavy coats. They're working hard, sweating, soaking their insulation layer, then stopping to rest, and hypothermia sets in faster than if they'd been wearing less. The system you need is simple. Base layer for moisture wicking, insulation layer for warmth, shell layer for wind and water protection. Base layer is synthetic or merino wool, never cotton. Cotton kills. It absorbs moisture, loses all insulating properties when wet, and takes forever to dry in cold conditions. You wear cotton in a winter collapse scenario, and you're already dead, you just don't know it yet. Insulation layer is where you stack the warmth. Multiple thin layers beat one thick layer because you can adjust based on activity level. Working hard and heating up? Strip a layer before you start sweating. Getting cold? Add a layer before you start shivering. Reactive temperature management is the difference between surviving and becoming a casualty. Shell layer is your wind and moisture barrier. Wind chill is real physics. A 30-degree day with 20 mph wind creates an effective temperature of 17 degrees. Your shell blocks that wind, and suddenly your insulation can actually do its job. Waterproof matters too, because precipitation plus cold equals death. You get wet in freezing conditions, and your survival time is measured in minutes to hours, not days. Now let's talk about extremities, because this is where most people lose function first. Your body prioritizes core temperature over peripheral circulation. When you're cold, blood vessels in your hands and feet constrict to preserve heat in your vital organs. This is autonomic. You don't control it. Your body is making the calculation that it's better to lose fingers than to die. Frostbite begins at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, not below zero. 32 degrees. Exposed skin in contact with metal at freezing temperature will freeze in seconds. And here's what nobody tells you. Once tissue freezes, the damage is permanent. You don't get those fingers back. You don't regain that dexterity. You're operating at reduced capacity for the rest of your survival scenario, which might be years. Gloves matter, boots matter, face protection matters, but they have to be the right type. Mittens are warmer than gloves because your fingers heat each other in a shared space. Liner gloves let you do detailed work while keeping shell mittens ready. Vapor barrier socks prevent sweat from reaching your insulation layer. Overboots add another insulation layer between you and frozen ground. And here's the secret that outdoor professionals know. Your head and neck are heat loss catastrophes. You lose 10 to 15% of body heat through your head in cold conditions. Not the 50% that old myths claim, but 10 to 15% is still significant when you're fighting to maintain every degree. A good hat, a neck gaiter, a balaclava, these aren't optional. These are life preservation tools. But it gets exponentially better because layering isn't just about clothing, it's about sleeping systems. Your sleeping bag rating is based on laboratory survival conditions, not comfort. A 20-degree bag means you won't die at 20 degrees if you're wearing layers inside the bag and using an insulated pad underneath. You won't be comfortable, you won't sleep well, but you probably won't die. The ground conducts heat away from your body faster than air. This is basic physics. You need insulation between you and the surface you're sleeping on. A foam pad, an air mattress, layers of cardboard, pine boughs, anything that creates dead airspace between you and heat-sucking earth. Your expensive sleeping bag doesn't matter if you're losing heat through your back all night. And here's where winter survival becomes genuinely psychological. You're not sleeping well. Ever. Your body is stressed, burning extra calories, fighting constant cold. Sleep deprivation compounds everything. Decision-making degrades, reaction time slows, immune function crashes. You become more susceptible to cold injuries, accidents, and mistakes that would have been trivial in normal conditions but are fatal in winter collapse scenarios. The psychological toll is the hidden killer that nobody talks about. Humans are not designed for constant cold exposure. We're tropical apes who got clever with fire and clothing. Take away modern heating and we're fighting our biology every single day. The stress is cumulative. The exhaustion is relentless. And at some point, people just give up. I've seen the research. Survival situations in extreme cold show mortality rates that spike not from freezing but from apathy. People stop maintaining their fire, stop melting water, stop eating. Not because resources ran out, but because the will to continue ran out. This is the enemy that no amount of gear or knowledge can fully protect against. You need purpose. You need routine. You need small victories every day that remind you that you're still fighting, still surviving, still human. Make the fire, melt the water, eat the calories, check the perimeter. These become rituals. These become the framework that keeps your mind functional when your body is screaming at you to just stop and rest and let the cold win. And here's what I know with absolute certainty. You cannot do this alone. Winter survival in a collapse scenario requires division of labor. One person maintaining heat, water, food, security, and sanitation while also fighting constant cold? That's not sustainable beyond a few weeks. You need other people. People you trust. People with skills that complement yours. People who can take watch while you sleep and who you can trust to wake up for when it's your turn. But here's the dark truth that most survival communities don't want to address. Other people also represent your greatest threat in a winter collapse scenario. Resources that might sustain one person for 6 months sustain 2 people for 3 months. Every additional person is a mouth to feed, a body to warm, a security risk to manage. And desperate people in freezing conditions make desperate choices. You're going to face decisions that have no good answers. Do you help the family freezing outside your door knowing it reduces your survival margin? Do you turn them away knowing they'll die within hours? Do you share your fire, your food, your shelter with strangers who might rob you or worse? There's no training manual for this. There's no right answer. There's just trade-offs and calculations and living with consequences. Winter doesn't care about your morality. Winter doesn't care about your compassion or your ethics or your humanity. Winter is thermodynamics, and thermodynamics is neutral. The only question that matters is whether you have enough calories, enough fuel, enough insulation, and enough will to make it to spring. Here's your choice right now. You can keep scrolling and hope that if the collapse comes, it comes in summer. You can assume that your current preparations are adequate, even though we both know they're not. You can convince yourself that winter survival is someone else's problem. Or you can spend the next 48 hours doing the following. Open a new tab right now and calculate your actual caloric needs at sustained sub-freezing temperatures. Triple your food storage target. Map every potential heat source within 5 miles of your location. Identify structures with proper ventilation for safe indoor heating. Audit your clothing for cotton and replace it with wool or synthetic. Build a sleep system rated for temperatures 20 degrees colder than your region's historical minimum. Create an insulated shelter within your shelter. Test it. Sleep in it overnight with no auxiliary heat and see if your body heat and sleeping system can actually maintain survivable temperature. Document what works and what fails before your life depends on that knowledge. Stock multiple fuel types. Not just wood, not just propane. Kerosene, alcohol, coal, compressed logs, anything that burns and produces heat. Diversify your systems because single points of failure kill you in winter. Install carbon monoxide detectors with backup batteries. Test them monthly. Learn to process snow efficiently. Practice melting water in sub-freezing conditions with minimal fuel expenditure. Learn to insulate water containers so they don't freeze overnight. These are skills you cannot develop in an emergency. These require trial and error and failures that cost you nothing right now, but would cost you everything when it matters. Here's the reality. 99% of people won't do any of this. They'll read this, nod along, agree that winter is serious, and then do absolutely nothing. They think they're prepared because they watched a YouTube video. They're not prepared. They're educated casualties. You can be part of the 99% who think about survival, or you can be part of the 1% who actually prepare for winter specifically. And within that 1%, you can be part of the 0.1% who test their systems, identify failures, correct problems, and build genuine cold weather sustainability instead of just stockpiling gear they don't know how to use. Winter is coming. Not metaphorically. Literally. Every year. And if the collapse comes during those months, the cold will kill more people than violence, starvation, and disease combined. Because winter is physics, and physics doesn't negotiate. Your move.